All right. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's webinar. Really excited to have you all with us here today. My name is Jessie Smith. I am the Vice President of Product Management responsible for our data quality portfolio here at Ataccama. I have spent the last decade in product management and product development with a very deep focus on enterprise data quality, data fabric, data integration, and various cloud technologies. I'm currently leading the product management team for our data quality portfolio, like I mentioned, and we are, of course, at Ataccama very passionate about helping organizations harness the power of their data with accuracy, efficiency, and trust. Today, we have a really exciting webinar lined up for you. This is going to be kind of that interactive fireside chat style webinar. Before we dive into that content, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items with you just to make sure that you can get the most out of today's session. First up, we have our chat feature, which is available for you to share your thoughts, comments, engage with any of the other attendees throughout the webinar. We really encourage you to use that and join in on the conversation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, we also have our Q&A feature. We do have a dedicated team of experts here behind the scenes that are waiting to handle your questions. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. We will also have a live Q&A session at the end of today's webinar where we'll address as many of those questions as we can. So now I'm very excited to introduce our two speakers who bring with them a really great wealth of knowledge and experience for today's discussion. So first up, we have David Tischler, who is a seasoned leader in data strategy, recently working with a leader in quick service restaurants on a data governance roadmap. With leadership experience at companies like General Motors and Ally Financial, David brings a wealth of expertise in data governance, data science, and more. Joining him is Greg Smith, who has over 27 years of experience helping organizations solve complex business problems through data democratization. Greg has successfully led over 70 projects across industries, including banking, pharma, retail, with a focus on data governance, compliance, and analytics. Thank you both so much for being here today. Before we kind of dive into the main content, Greg, could you tell us a little bit about Expleo and just what you guys do at Expleo?
Yep, Jessica, thank you. So Expleo is a French-based consulting firm, everything from engineering all the way through data modernization, data governance, data quality, analytics, everything about data for organizations. About 19,000 employees in total, and about 1.4 billion euros in revenue. Out of those 19,000 employees, we have 5,000 that focus on technology and data validation, those kind of things, across 30 countries. We offer both onshore and nearshore and offshore development, and been around for about the company itself's been around for about 20 years. And there's a quick outline of companies that we work with around the globe, and we'll talk more about that later.
Great.
Over to you,
Thanks,
Jessica.
Greg. And then before we get started, of course, just wanted to kind of give a background of Ataccama and really what we're here to do. So, of course, we focus primarily on data quality, data governance, master data management. But at the end of the day, we really focus on helping organizations accelerate business initiatives. We're really focused on driving that business value with our clients with trusted, high quality governed data. So let's get into the discussion today. We really want to kick this off by first talking about some kind of context and questions around data quality and why is it important. So let's get into the first question. And David, I really want to start with you for this one. So what is data quality and why is it critical for organizations today?
Well, as you were saying in the beginning there, it's so important for the corporations that use data to have good trusted data to make good decisions with in order to achieve their objectives. So when we talk about data quality, a lot of people will talk about the different dimensions of data quality. And of course, we're talking about things like accuracy or its completeness, timeliness, and a lot of times it's fit for purpose. What are we supposed to be using it for? As we see many companies over the years that have been transitioning to be data-driven organizations, where they're maybe transitioning from innovating, let's say, on how to make a burger or a different style of burger and how that resonates with the customers out in the field, to how do I use the data about customers, where our customers are at, to decide where to put the next great restaurant. And all of that is based on good data. Now, as that data travels from one part of the organization to the other part of the organization and gets joined with data from different groups, it's really critical to ensure that that data still has and meets certain thresholds of data quality for the organization, maybe thousands of miles away, to be able to use that to make decisions. So some examples of why it's important or how companies use it varies. I mean, it's all the way from that strategic decision making based on informed analytics. So using that data to drive your strategic growth or to increase profitability, but also to operate efficiently. So we use data to drive certain operational processes, like an inventory management system or order processing. A lot of these things are now data driven. If you've got poor data quality, you're going to end up with inefficient processes and not be very competitive in that regard. We're also seeing a lot of data being used for customer satisfaction. So making sure that you have accurate, timely data that's available, even available to the customer, so that the customer is able to interact with your company, or you're able to interact with the customer with good customer service and having the information that you need available to you.
Yeah.
Also knowing like what kind of data is important to have about the customer and what's not. So these are all examples of why it's important to companies.
Great explanation. And I think I loved the term that you used, fit for purpose, because I think, to your point, there are so many different things that you can do with data. And you mentioned the analytical use cases or the operational use cases to drive efficiency there. Or even, thinking about a customer sat case where you want to make sure that your customers are actually satisfied with your product. There's so many different things that you can do with data. And it's so critical to make sure that you have things that are fit for purpose and that you are creating those kind of data product structures where you have data quality that is important for that particular piece of data and the way that you want to actually use it and drive value. So I think that's a great way to think about it. As we're kind of talking about how organizations are thinking about data quality, kind of leads me into my next question of what are some of those core components of an effective data quality program?
I think right off the bat, and I think this is similar to any other aspect of data governance, it's important for you to tie your data governance program to core company objectives. So we're not doing data governance for data governance. I'm sorry, data quality for data quality purposes. We're tying that to a larger initiative so that the company can meet a strategic objective. So that's kind of the best way to start this journey is to identify that as your starting point. And then it's very important to identify a sponsor or the key stakeholders. And a lot of times, a lot of companies, we see that the data quality initiatives are starting in the IT organization, but we really need to find out who cares about that data and who's using that data in the business, who owns that data. So we need to identify typically a business sponsor that's going to champion this, and then all of the stakeholders that care about it. And then we form this type of a council. This council then is going to, the council stakeholders are going to look at things like policies, the overall objectives of the program. They're going to start working across the functional organization to make sure there's alignment on the data definitions and uses and so forth, and the data quality. And then you start an education process of educating everybody on data quality and the various components that are important to have that conversation about why is the data thresholds, why these are important, why do I need to care about that? Because the person that needs to care about it isn't always the person that's going to be using it. And so there's that kind of downstream conversation that you need to have. And then put all of it together with a framework that's right for your organization, These are standard operating procedures that help the overall data quality process function within your organization, and help that run consistently as you grow it from that initial use case to the critical use cases that are important for that business.
And this is such a great way to think about it. I think these are nice, kind of clear, actionable steps. And I think that the thing that you said at the beginning, tying to company objectives, is so, so critically important. One of the things that we see at Ataccama when, we're working with Expleo or other partners or with clients is that you are not going to get the kind of traction that you want in a data governance program or in a data quality program if you don't have that business stakeholder buy-in. It's one of the most critical things that we see. And we run a customer advisory board, and we meet kind of twice a year with 10 to 15 of our clients. And this actually came up in our last customer advisory board. And it was one of the things that was said, you can't, I think you said, you can't just do data quality for data quality's sake, right? Or data governance for data governance sake. You have to tie it to some kind of outcome and objective that you're trying to drive towards. So love these steps. And I think it's such a great way to kind of think about how you can set yourself up for success, and then how you can actually roll that out in an organization. Because like you said, when you get to that training and support piece, at the end of the day, the people who are using or who are actually implementing this program might not be that end stakeholder. So really important to get them trained up and supported in what this process looks like.
Yeah, I think another way to look at this too is that data needs to become a business asset. And so you treat it like any other asset in the company, and someone needs to own that asset and be accountable for that asset. And you need to continually invest and maintain that asset. So if you look at that from that perspective, you kind of shift the conversation a little bit in terms of how you manage it within a company.
I'm writing that down as a quote. Data needs to be a business asset. Let's get that on a t-shirt.
This is Greg. I was just going to interject. I've worked with a lot of companies, and compliance is a big piece, and financial services and insurance companies. BCBS 239, too big to fail. Loan exposure was a big driver. Now for every company, personal identifiable information protection and data loss prevention are key. So typically when you're talking to the business, that kind of framework funds these kind of projects as well.
Absolutely. It's so, so critical, that kind of understanding and buy-in from that business, for sure. Before we get to the next question, what I'd love to do is actually poll the audience. So get some interactivity going here. And a question for everyone: what aspect of your current data quality program needs the most improvement? Is it around people, processes, or technology? So we'll give you guys, I think, a minute to cast your votes here, and then we'll show the results to the audience. I'm going to lock in my guess. There's always one that tends to be a front runner here. All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds, and then Amy, I'll defer to you on when we've had enough votes come in and we can publish to the audience. All right, processes. Yes, I am not surprised by this. I would definitely say, so processes, a clear winner there. And I'm sure at Expleo, obviously this is where you guys come in and really help. But everything that I always see, it's really mostly a cultural shift that needs to happen in an organization. It's all about how you kind of build that culture around adoption, how you roll out the right processes to get people to kind of buy into what you're trying to do, and how you kind of roll that out across the organization. So no surprises there. And I'm sure no surprise to you guys, David or Greg, either.
No, absolutely not. It's definitely about change adoption. So we should have changed their slides to follow with that one, but we're going to follow with people.
Yes. So despite the popular vote of process, we are going to get more into a couple questions around people. So David, let's start with you again. What standards or, oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping questions here. Who should be involved in a data quality program when we're thinking about people in an organization?
Sure. this varies from company to company. Again, it's going to be driven by your culture and your organization. It's likely going to, the data quality roles are going to mirror the data governance roles. So at a high level, or as an example, I think, the first thing you need to make sure you have is this sponsor. So this is typically someone senior in the organization that are able to articulate why data governance and data quality is important to the strategic objectives of the company. So they're really going to be the ones championing or advocating for the initiative itself. Your next role would be the data governance leader. So you need someone that's able to bring that expertise about data governance and help the organization coordinate around this process and ensure that the things that are being set up around data governance are aligning to the company's objectives and so forth. Then you have a set of data stewards. So these are the people that are custodians of the data quality. They're going to oversee those data assets that we talked about. They're going to be the people that enforce the policies and maintain the accuracy of that data. And then as we talk, there's those data consumers that are the people that are using the data. That can be people, and they're using it, to make informed decisions. So they're going to be providing feedback on their feeling about the data, what data is critical to them. So we're not going to go and put data quality on every piece of data in the company. We're going to identify which are the critical data elements, and those are the ones that we're going to build those rules around and put monitoring and so forth. So then we take and form a committee, a data governance committee. So this is kind of could be a working group, it could be a group that is also providing oversight on strategy, on policies and things like that. So they're just making sure that we're aligned across the organization and applying the policies and procedures consistently. And then there's those data owners. So some of these roles can be overlapping. A person can play multiple roles, but a data owner is an individual within the organization that really controls a specific data set. And so they're accountable for defining what that data means and how it can be used and where it can be used and things like that. So that they may own it, let's say in the finance department, but multiple groups are going to be using that data in their data sets. That data owner is still back in the finance organization, saying how it can be used and how it's defined and so forth. So those are some of the core roles. You might, obviously you'll be adding roles such as a data quality business analyst. So these are the people that really get in and develop these business roles, and they'll be working with, let's say, data quality developers that will build the DQ rules in the tool set, and then together they will then report that the results and so forth with the committees or the data owners and so forth. So again, depending on what your organization looks like, those are probably some of the core roles that you should be considering when setting up a data governance framework.
This is great. And I think depending on the size of the organization too, I've seen these types of roles span, maybe just a handful of people to hundreds, potentially even thousands, if you're including all of those engineers and all of the people that might be involved in actually working with the tools and building analytics. So with so many people, this kind of leads me into my next question, because when you're dealing with so many people, there's obviously the question of, that kind of culture of adoption and how you get people bought in. So, how can organizations really foster a culture that truly values data quality and sees it as an important thing to be focusing on?
Yeah, I would say I've seen more than one initiative where you've maybe developed the framework, you've put in the tool, you've built some rules, and it's failed, right? The adoption just hasn't happened. So you've done everything right, nothing was done wrong there, but the part that was left out was this: how do we make sure that the program has change adoption built into it? So now, as we move forward with clients, we always build in this component called change adoption. We look at this right at the beginning, and we bring in people that are specialized in this space. So they're not DQ experts, they're change adoption experts. And so what they're really doing is taking that leadership commitment that we said was so important to have when you start your data governance program, and then you're tying that to a storytelling process. So you're telling the story of why the data is so important and how it's important, and what's in it for me if I'm the person at the bottom well, at the beginning rather, of the food chain, the data food chain. Why is it so important for me to ensure that the data that I'm generating is quality, is high quality and complete and meets all the thresholds, and which components of it are critical, so that I'm not thinking about everything, I'm thinking about the things that are very important to me. So telling that story, and then really implementing a data literacy program where you're promoting data and its uses and its importance and everything to all the organization, so that they understand that this is a function that's actually embedded into your organization. And then you're telling them the things that you've done, right? You're telling them the successes that have happened. You're telling them continuous improvement. You're telling them about how it's enabled some great analytical project that might have been kicked off. And so it's just embedded into these other things. But when they start seeing this and they understand the story, and they, it's tied to that accountability that we talked about earlier, and they have the accountability in there. Now it starts becoming just part of their everyday job. It's not something someone in the IT organization is doing. It's just something we need to be thinking about on a daily basis, as we generate and transform the data and share the data and use the data. So I think those are the key components. But again, just putting a change adoption program around that whole thing, putting a strategy together, and making that really part of your project right from the beginning.
Sure, that makes total sense. And I think to what you were saying about the accountability piece and making it part of their day-to-day operations can really help drive more of that transformation. I liked the kind of note you had around storytelling and really getting as part of that kind of change adoption and change management, talking about the why behind why are you doing what you're doing? How is this going to make the company better? How is this going to make their lives better? I think a lot of stakeholders that we work with, they feel the pain, right? They do feel the difficulty when they're trying to build a report and they have to open up a ticket with IT and it takes 3 weeks to get data back, and then something's wrong and they got to go back and forth and in this kind of doom loop. So I think you'll find that, at least in our experience, there's lots of people who are going to be excited in the organization about kind of adopting this change. But as with any change, you also will have, some of those naysayers, and you might run into people who maybe they don't believe it, or maybe to the point you were making, maybe they've seen some of these projects come in and, that was great. And, it's kind of like this group up in their ivory tower that had all these amazing ideas and, didn't really do anything in the organization. Yeah. And, we're trying to kind of start again and start another project that, we're trying to drive that widespread adoption of. So, leads me into my next question of, when you do have that kind of resistance to change, are there anything that, David or Greg, either of you have seen around how leadership can address that resistance to change and that lack of engagement?
Yeah, I think even before we get into that, I think something you mentioned is worth bringing up, and that is that, and it ties to this, and that is that if you put all of this great data quality rules in place and monitoring, if you don't address the remediation, if you don't do something with that when the quality issues are raised, and do it in a way that's quick and it's communicated to the users, of course they're not going to be behind the program. Let's not do this again because it didn't lead to anything, right? I spent all of this time in this data quality program, yet I'm still waiting for the data issues to be fixed. So making sure that you are following up on that within the organization is important to avoid resistance down as you go forward. But I think we've talked a lot about a lot of these things when we say that in order to get everybody behind this, it needs to be tied to that vision of how it's tied to the overall company and strategic objectives and so forth. So I think that's important. And then I think the other thing that's really important is that there's business ownership. So a lot of times I see the IT organization, because they have a data management responsibility, they have certain aspects of data quality that they're going to put in place. But to really drive data quality and get it accepted across the organization, it's really having that business ownership, and then having a senior leaders in the organization saying that part of your job is around data and data quality, so that they know in order to do their, to perform in their role efficiently, they're going to have to address and own that data. So I think that's important too when you're embracing it as part of the culture, to avoid kind of this lack of engagement, is really make it part of their responsibilities, and then making sure that it's visible. So just having the data, a dashboard out there that says, hey, we're really strong in these areas and we're having a problem in this data domain. Now it's visible to everybody, and so that gives a little bit more support to getting it, or incentive, I should say, to having that domain area more reactive to addressing the data quality, that they know that it's important and it's visible to the whole organization. And so now that's kind of the extra incentive they may need to engage more in the data quality process.
Great. And then, one of the things that you had said was around, actually addressing the remediation and making sure that you're showing teams that you are making progress and that the work you're doing is leading to results. I think it's so important, showing those wins and not trying to boil the ocean with your project and your implementation. We've seen a lot of projects with, working with our clients where, just building up those small wins. And I loved what you said about making it visible, even having like a dashboard, maybe, you put up a TV screen in the office where you have the results of some of your initiatives going, or maybe it's, on an internal company intranet where people can access it. Just being able to showcase the kind of success and the steps that you've made can be so important to getting that buy-in. Greg, would love to hear from you too, if you have any other things that you've seen, or just advice that you would have for those leaders in this space, for helping to make this a reality in organizations.
Well, sure. Well, some of the things that I've seen that I've worked in organizations to get, initial buy-in and then to, maintain that over time is just to show how you've increased trust in the data. And, the first piece when you're, looking at data, adding a data quality program to the organization is, where's the low-hanging fruit of, where am I having challenges now? And if I implement a data quality program, what's my return on investment? And logical things that we think about are, delivering packages, is the address data right? And that's a long-term data quality program for a lot of organizations. If you can't validate that, where your customers, you can't get them the product. Another idea is marketing, where if you can't understand the data that you have about what you've sold already in retail locations or online, you can't have the right products in the right place. So it's low hanging fruit for proving the value of data quality. The longer term is customer satisfaction, revenue opportunities, and risk avoidance. And again, we talked about PII data and not losing data. Part of that is identifying where is that data, and is the data usable? If it is, I need to put protections around it. And then another one is I'll talk a little bit later about artificial intelligence. The more organizations adopt different AI solutions, those solutions are only as valid as the quality of the data is that they make decisions on. So those are all reasons to ideas to put in place to say, hey, we're going to avoid risk, we're going to and enhance revenue and make your job easier to get that adoption.
Absolutely. I think especially on the AI point, I can't wait to get into that discussion, because I think there's this whole element of the importance of data quality for those AI initiatives. But I think what you said about the trust in data, and whether you're in marketing or sales or HR or finance, you do have some need for that trust in data. And I heard once someone say, in an organization, no matter where you are in that organization, no matter if you are in marketing or in sales or in finance or HR, everyone is a data person, because at the end of the day, everyone has initiatives that they are trying to drive with data and to make data-driven decisions. And I think, to your point, creating trust in that data is so incredibly important as we think about, how we can get that kind of organizational buy-in. So I want to switch a little bit to processes, as it was our most highly rated and highly voted poll item. So David, let's start with you, because I think when we talk about process, one thing that always comes to mind is a framework or standard, right? How can we roll out adoption? Are there any kind of best practices or frameworks that we can follow when we think about process and how we actually roll out these types of programs within our organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some industry organizations that provide good starting points for framework. Throwing some acronyms out there: the EDM Council, BCAM is another one, THEMA, and we use some of these frameworks as starting points or assessments for our customers. So we'll go in and, let's say, we'll do a ECAM assessment that will help set the baseline of what is the current capability within the organization. And as I think Greg mentioned, what are those areas that we might want to start with? It kind of helps the organization prioritize where it wants to be. And then you start, building out these processes that you want, that you're going to use in your data governance, data quality framework. So some of those key things, obviously the broader data governance program will have a set of policies and procedures that will include data governance, data quality related things. We'll get into, as we get into the actual process, it usually starts with identifying that critical data, data sets, then profiling that data, and looking and inspecting the condition of that data to determine what type of things are we seeing, what characteristics are we seeing about that data, so we can start working with the business owners to build some rules around that data. So it helps inform them around the business rules around those critical data elements. And then we take those business rules and we turn those into data quality checks. So we use the tool to build out the data quality monitoring, and then a process around what do we do with that. So now we take the results of that, and we'll serve that up in some sort of a dashboard, a report, or maybe it's a series of workflows that are kicked off depending on a threshold not being met. So we kind of try to automate some of these steps of alerting people that there might be something to look at in the data. And then there's a data remediation process. So we decide, yep, there is something wrong with the data, and now we need to get a remediation in place. Those remediations are prioritized and reviewed by let's say, those councils we talked about. Make sure that we're addressing the most important things first. And then as we look at this whole process, we're always trying to continually improve. It's like, are things happening over and over again? Why is that? Is there something upstream that we need to look at as the root cause? Are our processes efficient? Do we need to improve on some of the communications and what's in it for me and buy-in type of things, so that these issues are getting addressed more? Or is the business even changing, and now the priority, the data that they need is changing, and we may need to start looking at third-party data, which brings into a whole different aspect of quality. How do we know that is quality data? So there's this constant continuous improvement loop that you're going to be working on within your framework to make sure that you're always addressing what's important to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the comment that you made there at the end about third-party data, it adds in this entirely new dimension, because we work with a lot of organizations, especially in the financial services industry, that typically bring a lot of that third-party data in. If you're thinking about investment banking, for example, we're trying to pull in a number of different third-party data, maybe from Bloomberg or from Dun & Bradstreet, and you're trying to reconcile that and what's the most correct data for that particular day. It becomes a very large effort to think about how you deal with that third-party data, and then how do you reconcile that. with the rest of your data quality programs. And, you're making pretty big decisions based on that data, especially in those highly regulated industries. So how do you make sure you can actually, going back to the comment, I think, Greg, that you made around trust in data, how can you be sure that it is the most trusted piece of data? So love this kind of prescriptive framework here. And I think it really mirrors a lot of what we see inside of Ataccama as well, in terms of kind of how organizations get started. And one additional kind of piece of context I'd like to add here too, in terms of something that we see, especially in that column around enabling business rules, is what we often see, and I would love to hear from you guys as well, but we often see this need or desire to democratize access to the line of business stakeholder, because often the people that are actually implementing the tool, and those folks most often sit in an IT part of the organization, they don't necessarily know what the data is used for, and they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily the subject matter expert. So how can you democratize that access of either grabbing that knowledge from those subject matter experts that do sit in the line of business, that have understanding of what that data is going to be used for? How do you translate that back? Or how do you kind of just give them access to kind of write whatever they need to? And I think we're going to get into the AI piece in a second, but AI obviously has a part to play here in that democratized data access. But curious to hear what you guys are seeing along that front too.
Yeah, absolutely.
so
I think.
Go ahead,
Go
Dave.
ahead, Greg.
So what I've seen, the challenge is that on the regulatory side, there's rules around who can see what data.
Yep.
So if I'm a sales manager in the Northeast and I want to see what are my sales in the organization, I can only have access to that data in my territory. Or if I'm an analyst in marketing, I can only see the sales metrics, but I can't see people's names, addresses, and credit card information. So there's a lot of rules that have to be implemented around that, and there's a lot of third-party solutions out there. Databricks has one, Snowflake has one, and others, where you can mask that data, you can scramble that data so that as a user I can get the metrics I need, but I can't get confidential data.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important. I will mention a personal incident that I had, where I got a letter that my investment company lost, absolutely accidentally gave my data away, or someone got it. 100 million records that were gone. So it's like, great. All right. So I actually worked with that organization and figured out with them how many places could you get that data, that information. And although they had a data quality program, they didn't have the governance capabilities and the access control. So they had 18 places that you could access customer data. 11 of them you could literally put it on a what do you call it, a scan disk or a separate device, and walk away with it. So we did a program with them where we said, okay, well, we're going to manage the access controls. We're going to figure out what are the right data sources, how many do you need, and they got it down to 4, where you couldn't copy that data. So, that's just one great example of how important is it to understand what is the right source of data, how am I using that data, what's the quality of that data, and based on the best source, the best quality, create that single source of information that you want to manage. So yeah, I mean, having trust again isn't just about the right source of data. It's about allowing people to access the data they need, but do it in a way that meets those regulatory requirements.
Sure. And what a story. 18 places down to 4. That's pretty great, especially if those 4 places were not able to copy data and export them out of the organization. So just goes to show the power of a governance program and putting those right kind of access controls around the data, because it's such an important part of how we build these types of programs on that more kind of holistic scale. David, you were saying something as well.
Yeah, I think it ties into the next question that we have too, and that's really how data quality is a large component of the data governance program itself, and that's a good data governance program is going to be business centric. So absolutely. If having data quality inside of a business-centric process like that is going to be, by definition, adding the business lens that you can't possibly. I mean, I've been both on the IT side and on the business side. You can't possibly know, on the IT side, all those things about how important it is to the business, all the different dimensions and the ways it needs to be, looked at. So I think when you have a good data governance program that's business centric, you're going to have a good outcome on the data quality side.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, let's hop right into that next question, because I wanted to talk about some of the essential capabilities of a data governance program, how the role of data quality looks like in those broader data governance framework. Love to touch on the AI piece. So David, you had talked about a little bit about how, these data governance frameworks really need to be business centric. I think would love to explore also, how does data quality fit into the AI picture? What are some of the other important things that we need to think about in terms of how
Yeah,
data
absolutely.
quality fits in?
So if we think about data governance program, that's really about managing the company's data effectively and responsibly, right? And what we're seeing, a lot of our customers are now starting generative AI governance programs. So how do they want to manage the use of generative AI models and the data that is used, consumed, and so forth. So it's taking the DQ to another level. So now we're not just putting data quality around the input data, but we're also, we're also monitoring how the training data is used, and is it following certain thresholds and guidelines. And we're also looking at DQ around the output of those models, and those models, is there drift? Are there changes in the output that are unexpected or outside of certain parameters? So both the data governance programs are growing because they now have to incorporate this generative AI governance, and then data quality is being used to do a lot of that monitoring of the models themselves. And I think, Greg, you probably can share what some of our customers are doing with this, and how it's changing both the data quality and data governance landscape for us.
Sure. So, this slide just kind of talks about, data in the organization, and we're all familiar with, how we have data coming in, very rapidly now from devices, databases, customer, looking for products on e-commerce sites and everything. So, the challenge is, how do you get that raw data into a format that you can leverage it? And the way you do that is data governance, quality checks. So data quality always used to be a back-end solution where it was, hey, let's validate this customer data, let's make sure this address is right. But now it's more important, especially with artificial intelligence, to get that data right in real time and to understand how usable is this data when I get it into my applications for data analytics, data science, data visualization, so I can get that real-time view of where, how am I doing as an organization today? What's my inventory load? How can I get the right data to the right place? And am I making the right decisions with my logistics, my trading, my bank, my investments, and so forth? Data quality is just a key piece. And as we implement more and more artificial intelligence solutions out there, think of it as a pipeline, not just for data, but how am I using artificial intelligence in the organization? You need to funnel it through a governance framework that says, am I using that data ethically? Are the models that are using that data correct? Am I using personal identifiable information in that model that I shouldn't? And the challenge is, if the data is not good, or not the quality of that data at the same time is wrong, you're going to get bad decisions from these artificial intelligence applications. So we're actually working with one of the largest clients in the world right now to validate that those artificial intelligence solutions that they want to implement are going to meet their requirements and not go rogue. They're not going to go terminate a rogue. but go
We don't
rogue
want to
and
see
paint
that.
themselves. I had to say it, right? But they're not going to have, challenges later to say, hey, I don't want to have to defend myself in the public view for making bad decisions or leaking data or saying the wrong thing. And more importantly, I don't want to have to answer to management and say, hey, I brought this in and I made the wrong decision because the data I used didn't have the quality level I needed it to. So, these are challenges that, we're not, we're implementing with one client. We're talking with 10 different clients right now about how do I even know how to do this? Where, what programs do I have to have in place? And, this slide talks about the AI solution for governance. What am I looking for when I implement these solutions? And there's a great example of the dashboard here with Ataccama to say, hey, can I depend on this data source? And it gives you the view to, the validity of that data. So, hey, maybe I need to question this. Maybe we need to do some work to capture that data better or correct the information. And again, data AI, you just want to monitor and assess that the data those frameworks are using or any application is using is continuously monitored. Ensure you have security. So again, you're not leaking that information out. You're not using personal identifiable information, credit card numbers, anything that's considered confidential to within the organization or externally. And you want to have data transparency of how good is that data, how it's the value of that data. Again, the dashboarding, accountability, and then, is the data fit for purpose for the AI use case? Every AI use case is going to be different. If it's a chat system for customer service versus if it's a new analytics system for financial management, you want to make sure that the data you have meets those requirements based on what you're trying to get out of the solution. So,
Absolutely.
David, did you want to, or I'm sorry, that's it. Jessica, back to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I think the point that you made around, the continuous monitoring and then also making sure that your data is fit for purpose, because depending on the type of AI that you are trying to implement, whether you're trying to do more traditional machine learning, or if you're using a large language model or a large action model or a small language model, like there are differences in terms of the data set that you need to curate and be able to feed into that. And then there's differences in terms of how you actually want to use that data. Certain AI models actually depend on kind of broken pieces of information being fed to it, whereas other ones won't work at all if you have incomplete or missing or ill-formed data. So I think, that kind of fit for purpose, again, we talked about that at the beginning, but it's so important when we think about AI. And at the end of the day, even though we're not to the point of and hopefully never will be to the point of the Terminator AI, AI does tend to be kind of like, it's not actually a living, breathing thing, but kind of like a living, breathing thing where it does change and it does drift and it does start to introduce bias, especially if the data that it is trained on, or if you do fine tuning of that particular model, it will kind of pick up those kind of tendencies. And we've seen many different news stories over the past couple of years of how that can kind of go rogue. So think again, to the points that you've made here, data quality is such an important element of any AI program or practice. And one of the items I wanted to mention around AI governance, I was talking with an analyst probably like a month ago or so, and we were talking about this concept of AI governance and, how frequently is he hearing organizations talk about it? And he said it's one of the hottest topics that comes to him. And it's one of the most frequently asked about things because, to your point, everyone's thinking about how do I establish this program? How do I make my employees more effective and more excited for, using this type of automation? And everyone wants to be able to use, a chat GPT or a Gemini in their work, but, how can we put the right guardrails around everything so we're not feeding confidential data into those models? And how do we make sure that we're using that AI in an ethical way? But one of the things that he mentioned is his forecast is that he does see the evolution of data governance into that AI governance, where he thinks it's going to be kind of the same groups of people who are really thinking about data governance and AI governance together. And you can almost think about them as kind of two sides of the same coin. because at the end of the day, you're really trying to kind of put those guardrails around how data is used and who's accessing it and what those PII kind of guardrails look like. So some really interesting points here for sure. David, anything you'd want to add to that?
No, those are all the things we're seeing as well. And it's, I think some of this AI governance is starting off kind of on its own because you need some specialists to think about these things, but really it all comes back into the overall governance, data governance program for the company. So.
Absolutely. All right. I think that actually wraps up our kind of fireside chat section of the webinar. We have a couple minutes here for a Q&A. And then we also have a poll for everyone at the end of the session. So if you could stick around to answer that as well. We have a couple of questions coming in, a lot about different Ataccama kind of product level questions. But of course, if anyone in the audience has some questions around kind of people or process or some of these essential capabilities that we talked about, we'd love to cover that with you as well. I'll go ahead and take some of these more Ataccama product questions, and then we can also follow up because there's a couple coming in. We can follow up directly with some of you as well. So there's a question here about, is Ataccama an API or does it use another plugin to integrate data from other sources? So if you're not super familiar with the Ataccama platform, we are a comprehensive data management platform. It does have a UI associated with it, as I think on that last slide we were seeing part of the UI for Ataccama. And we do have an API that you can use to integrate with other sources, as well as bring external data sources in. We also, of course, being a data management platform, have a lot of native connectors that you can use to connect to those other third-party tools like Workday or Salesforce or BigQuery or Snowflake or Databricks or whatever it might be. So we do work with a number of different data sources. In terms of someone was asking about what Ataccama 1 version was on that slide. So that's the current version of the product. I know, Greg, you had added that picture in, but that's a version of the product that's out in market today. So you can find that screen in the current version of the product. There's a question here about integration with Microsoft. Yes, we absolutely do integrate with a number of Microsoft technologies. We have everything from connectors to various Microsoft databases like Azure Synapse. We are about to support pushdown into Azure Synapse later this year. We're also working with Microsoft as another partner of ours to add in support for their Fabric ecosystem. We actually just added connectivity to their OneLake offering. So we have a number of different ways to integrate with Microsoft, in addition to having Lineage that supports Microsoft tooling like Power BI, like Microsoft SSIS, about to include Azure Data Factory in that as well. So a number of different integrations with Microsoft. Also some questions about data quality dimensions that Ataccama covers. So we cover, all the standard dimensions around, freshness and completeness. We have a whole kind of section in our documentation, so we can send that in the chat for you as well. Let's see, there's another question in here around, oh, this is a great question. So we had an AI report, this chat is moving. We had an AI report which covered data's criticality in successfully integrating AI. Can we discuss that in more detail? So effectively, data's criticality in, successful AI integration. So I think, we talked a lot about the criticality of data quality. Any other dimensions, Greg or David, that you can think of in terms of, what are the other important aspects for data that you'd want to consider in, that an AI integration or an AI initiative?
David, I think that's you.
Actually, I was going to ask one of our experts. We've got two other people from our data quality practice, John Hoppish and Eric Landis. If you guys would like to, one of you would like to take that question, that'd be great.
John and Eric, you might be on mute. There we go. I think, John, you're off mute now.
Repeat the question for me again, please.
So the question is, we had an AI report which covered data's criticality in successfully integrating AI. Can we discuss that in more detail? So what are some of the other, we just talked about, the importance of data quality and an AI initiative. Are there other dimensions of data's criticality to AI that we'd want to talk about amongst this group, or anything that you guys have seen at Expleo in terms of different data elements that might be critical when you're thinking about those AI initiatives?
I would say really any of the data quality dimensions that were discussed earlier all really apply to the AI space. They're all going to be critical for making sure your data quality is what it needs to be in order for your AI program to be successful. Really, I wouldn't exclude any of those data dimensions at all that we talked about.
Great. All right. Hopefully that answers the question. If the submitter has more follow-up questions, feel free to submit in the chat. We can answer that live. Let's see what else. There's a question here about how does Ataccama use AI? So we actually have support for a multitude of different AI techniques, primarily bucketing into traditional AI and generative AI. So we've had traditional AI built into the platform since 2016. Do a lot of machine learning techniques like k-means clustering, for example, to suggest business terms. We can do anomaly detection. There's a lot that we do around that anomaly detection and data freshness that involves machine learning. We just introduced generative AI into the product at the beginning of this year. So we actually have an open AI instance that we use. It's a private instance to Ataccama. And we use a RAG-based approach to do a kind of templated prompt where we can do, we have Gen AI kind of built features where we can do content generation for things like automatically generating a description for catalog item, being able to do, SQL to text, text to SQL, being able to suggest a data quality rule based on the profile of data. We can do translation of generated content. So there's a lot of really interesting things that we have built into our product today with Gen AI. And that all kind of works in that RAG-based approach with our OpenAI instance. That way we're not sending any sort of data or data sampling to that OpenAI instance. It's all just metadata driven. We have some really exciting things that are kind of coming up on our roadmap, and stay tuned. I have another session here that I wanted to talk about. So let's take one more question, and then I think we'll need to wrap up because we're pretty close to being done here. So I think, let's see. There's one more question around business platform or platform business adoption. Any examples that we can share? So I think for Ataccama, our tool is built for both technical and business people. So we absolutely can roll out in the way that we were describing before with that kind of democratized access, where we have, an IT team being more responsible for kind of the technical implementation of the tool. And then we might have stewards sitting in a data governance organization that are actually responsible for creating rules and policies. And then we can operate in a federated model where folks in the line of business are helping to write those rules, often with the assistance of our AI. Just in terms of like business adoption of tooling, curious, David, Greg, or John or Eric, any other kind of tips, tricks you would give to the audience here on business adoption of, data management tools?
Yeah, I'll say one. I've seen this in a couple of our clients where the business side will actually do the implementation. So yes, you have the technical team that's doing the technical pieces of it, but you'll have the business that's really defining a lot of how the application will be set up and used, and how people will work with it. So I think that's always led to a lot greater adoption. But I guess the question was really around how good is the tool from a business perspective, and when you're having a business group implement it, you have a better lens on that. So that always helps, regardless of which tool you're doing.
That's a great tip. Thanks, David. In the interest of time, I think we have like 30 seconds. Just wanted to do a plug for our Atacama Forward Conference, which is coming up in October. We'd love to have you join us there. Please go ahead and sign up for that conference. This is an Atacama conference, so we have lots of exciting content planned, including some really exciting announcements around AI. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to David and Greg and John and Eric for joining us today, and the whole Expleo team. It was a pleasure to have you. And thank you everyone for the time. This was wonderful.
It was nice to be here. Thanks for having us.